that are there. So for them, the Quran is what it should be for all believers, this cosmic text, this text of the uncreated, revealed words of God that disclose in themselves the infinite meaning, the infinite knowledge of God. That's what the Quran is. It embodies the infinite knowledge of God. Rumi, in one of his poems, he speaks about the fact that you are unable to bear the light of God. If only so little of it were revealed to you, you would cease to exist. And so therefore, he gives you these beautiful words. And these words contain that light. And as you grow, then they release that light in you, and it grows, so that you become more and more filled with light. And you are able to take in this legacy. So this is the way they looked upon the Quran. Of course, in the traditional Muslim world, who didn't memorize the Quran? Even today, one of the signs, one of the remarkable things about our ummah is that from east to west, West Africa all the way to China and to Indonesia and Malaysia, wherever you go, there's so many people who memorize this blessed text and who love this blessed text. The Sufis invariably are people who not only memorize it, generally from a very early age, but then they live it over and over again. They repeat it all the time. It becomes the setting for their daily life and their meditations. Ahmad ibn Hanbal, may Allah be pleased with him, and we should note here that in the Sufi tradition, all of the great legal imams, Abu Hanifa, Malik, Ash-Shafi'i, Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Sufyan al-Thawri, and many others that you may or may not know of, Abu Thawr, these are all regarded to be Sufi masters. And that is not plagiarism or alteration, of history. That's the reality. Again, they keep inward what in some, like Mevlana Jalaluddin, will be made outward as a mercy to humankind. They may not speak that. Malik himself, may Allah be pleased with him, who is the heir of Medina, is said to have taught, "Man tasharra'a wa lam yatahaqqaq tafassaq," that whoever lives by the Sharia alone, the outward law, but does not imbibe the haqiqah, the inner metaphysical reality, the inner truth, becomes corrupt, becomes a deviant. And whoever, وَمَنْ تَحَقَّقَ وَلَمْ يَتَشَرَّعْ تَزَنْدَقْ, and whoever takes in those inner metaphysical truths, the haqiqah, but does not put on the armor of the prophetic law, does not live by the law as they did, he will become a heretic, a zindiq, which is worse than a fasiq. وَمَنْ تَشَرَّعَ وَتَحَقَّقْ فَقَدْ تَحَقَّقْ. But whoever takes on the outward law and the haqiqah, he will have the haqiqah. Or he will also, out tasawwuf, in another transmission, he will be a real Sufi. And Imam Malik lived in the time of the first great Sufis like Ibrahim ibn Adham and others. Whether Imam Malik actually said this or not, scholars will disagree. They do not disagree that this is a statement that goes back to his time, and it is a statement that he would have endorsed, as was endorsed by the other great masters of that time. So Ahmad ibn Hanbal, he says, do not look for separate passages of the Quran in order to juxtapose them as if they were in contradiction. This is often what people do. But he said, read the Quran from the beginning to the end, and then from the beginning to the end, and then from the beginning to the end, and take it all in. And this is the way they did. This is especially the way the Sufis did. By the way, we should note that Al-Hallaj, may Allah have mercy on him, who is one of the very important pivotal figures in making the reality of Sufism part of the texture of Islamic civilization. And we can talk about that at another time. But what school did Al-Hallaj follow? He was a Hanbali. He was a very strict follower of the school of Ahmad ibn Hanbal. And there are many others, many of the great Persian Sufis, also like Al-Ansari. You know, they're also Hanbalis. The great Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, may Allah be pleased with him and give us the blessing of the mentioning of his name. He was the master of the Hanbali school, as he was also the master of the Shafi'i school. And he was able to give fatwas in both. He was a master of all outward knowledge. All of the recitations of the Quran, the hadith, the ilm of fatwa, the differences of opinion of the scholars, and so forth. And, but he is a Hanbali. And so again, we have to emphasize this fact. The idea that somehow the Sufis excuse themselves from the burdens of the law, this is a total misrepresentation of what that tradition is like. Again, there's no way, as the Sufis would say, the haqiqah, which is this ultimate reality, this ultimate truth, it is in the Sharia, like butter is in the milk. If you don't have full milk, you can't have butter. But to get the butter, you've got to churn the milk. And so that's what they do. They live that life, they churn that milk, and then they get this precious butter. Imam al-Ghazali in Ihya Ulum ad-Din, this incredible work, Imam al-Ghazali is of course a master of the masters. And Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, who comes later, they're of the same generation, when al-Ghazali is leaving Baghdad to take his 11-year spiritual journey, in which he'll write Ihya Ulum ad-Din, just as he leaves the city, this beautiful young boy from Gilan, from the Caspian Sea of Sunni Persia, at the order of his mother Fatima, Allah bless her, he comes into the city. That's Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, 17 years old. And he will spend the next 40 years in rigid discipline, mastering the outward sciences, mastering the inward training. And then really in many ways, Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, he will apply the program of Imam al-Ghazali. And Imam al-Ghazali is the master of this. In fact, if we were to talk about Ihya Ulum ad-Din, he's very careful to always keep the book on the level of the ordinary Muslim. He never wants to speak in Ihya Ulum ad-Din at a level that only he could understand, or only Mevlana Jalaluddin or Mevlana Shems at-Tabrizi could understand. He'll always take you to that door. He'll always say, there it is. If you want to go through the door, you're welcome. But he won't take you through the door in Ihya Ulum ad-Din. He will simply bring you to it. But I wanted to emphasize that the Quran is always for the Sufis this presiding rule, this germinating idea. They live in it. They never leave it. A great sheikh that I had the honor to be with for 19 years, my first primary sheikh, Sheikh Muhammad Abu Bakr, may God have mercy on him, our wonderful sister Adiba knew him well. And of course, Sheikh Abd-Allah was also one of his disciples. But he would complete the Quran every 3 days. I don't think he slept, but he lived the Quran. Every 3 days he does a khatam, every 3 days. And again, it's like the Quran just impregnates him. He embodies it. It shines forth from him. So I wanted to emphasize these things. I think it's very, very important. And therefore also the Sufis become the masters of synthetic interpretation. And again, if we were to study the Quran, there are many different approaches to it. May Allah enable all of us to live in the springtime, the verdant springtime of the Quran. May He make it the verdant springtime, Rabi' of our hearts, as we say. And in that, you have to taste the beauty of the Arabic language which is the most ancient and the most pure form of Semitic speech known to human beings. All forms of Semitic speech and related forms of speech, like that of Pharaonic Egypt, very close to Semitic, all of them are Middle Semitic compared to Arabic. Arabic is an ancient, pure Semitic tongue, preserved by the Arabian Peninsula, preserved by the Abrahamic custom of pilgrimage and sacred months. But it was a language that was created perfectly in order to be the receptacle of the Quran forever. So we know what that language means, and may you also be able to taste that language and to delve into it. But the Sufis, more than anyone else, are able to put it all together and to have these synthetic readings, which are also the very foundation, really, of Islamic science and of Islamic civilization. So the Sufi masters always sought istimbat, to take water, to draw water out of the earth, deduction, induction, from their khatam, from their recitation of the Quran from beginning to end, which they always repeat, especially from uninterrupted and repeated recitation. And this was very common among them, as this was also very common among the Salaf. When I began my study at the University of Chicago a long time ago, one of the books that I read first was History of Judges. And there's a book, History of Judges of Egypt, by Kindi. And there are other books. And I encountered this unbelievable statement many times in reading about these early Muslim judges of the 1st and 2nd and 3rd Islamic centuries, that they would read the Quran every night in its totality, and that some of them would read it every night 3 times. And it's like, I don't want to disbelieve that, because I have the gift of being very credulous. Thank God. I'm not a skeptical person. It's easy for me to believe. But, so I don't want to disbelieve, but how is that possible? And, of course, our dear brother Shems was talking about the footstep, how the Sufis were able to take a step into time. And he mentioned a great sheikh that he knew who was in Medina and said, I need to pray Maghrib, which is an hour away in Mecca. And so he stepped into the crowd and disappeared. It said Imam al-Nawawi, who was one of the great qutubs of Islam, in Jerusalem, to have his chain of transmission, the great masters of the 18th and early 19th, the Sanusi movement of him and other time. And a particular scholar knowledge was there. I just couldn't believe that. And he doubted it, but again, guided to him the entirety of the out, and it spread its to the east, west, and south, and it all then in the next a little bit about the name. Again, I don't. They will never say that. They say not even. That's another. Generally, a rejection of parental authority and respect. This is, you will have vision, you will have great blessing. And the quickest thing to bring disaster and impoverishment and sickness is to break the tie of kinship. Ask Allah to forgive us. Most of us grew up in this Sidi Shems great generation gap. And the things that happened, in the 1960s pitted us, unfortunately, in many cases, against our. And we calculated to destroy us and to make us unhappy. This is why and it restores everything. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. Banu? So, in the Maliki tradition, one of the people who immediately comes to mind is Ibn Ata'Allah as-Sakandari. So if you know the Maliki school, he is an authority, totally. He's a master of the Maliki school. And he is a legal scholar. His father was a legal scholar. Shems Tabrizi is a legal scholar. Okay, so usually they go through a process of transformation which may not be as dramatic as that of Mevlana Jalaluddin, because he is the precious pearl. But most of them go through transformations like that. Al-Izz ibn Abd al-Salam, who is one of the greatest masters of the Shafi'i school, he had great misgivings about the teachings of some of the masters like Ibn Arabi. And he had reservations about them. But then he also comes around. Ibn Taymiyyah, who is a very complex person, and he is a nominalist, by the way. Nominalists are people who believe that they're not things called essences. That's a really critical mistake. It denies the whole realm of archetypes, which most of us in our tradition believe in fundamentally, even witness. But he believes in you name things. They have names. They're nominal. And they have attributes. So if you're a nominalist, then you can take this tradition to bits. You can take it apart so that nothing is left. But Ibn Taymiyyah himself was a Sufi. He was a follower of Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. And he never left his awrad and his adhkar. And Ibn Taymiyyah is known to have repented at least twice in his life. And when he repented, he said, I go back to the community, and under no compulsion from anyone, I declare that certain things I have said are wrong and mistaken. And probably he died that way. This is why, if we know many of the great sheikhs, like I could mention Mawlana al-Habib Ahmed Mashur al-Haddad, also Sheikh Muhammad Abu Bakr, and I could name others, great Jilani sheikhs, for example. They won't let you say anything bad about Ibn Taymiyyah. They would never let us do that. And one of them even told me that, do you know what his end was like? How did he end? Probably he had a good end. In fact, Al-Qadi An-Nabahani, who is one of the great Sufis and great judges of Lebanon of the 19th century, he wrote a book on intermediation, tawassul, and tashaffu', intercession, and istighatha, calling upon the prophets and messengers and saints for help. It's a great book. It's a very famous book. But he was urged to do that because of the influence of Ibn Taymiyyah that was being used to reject this out of hand. And of course, the movement of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, if it were not for things in Ibn Taymiyyah, it would have never gotten off the ground. That's one of God's wisdoms in having a person like Ibn Taymiyyah, who is a bahr. He's a sea. It's just as An-Nabahani says, that sea sometimes coughs up things that you don't want to collect. It's not like a sea that just gives you pearls and coral. Sometimes it coughs up cadavers and other things. That's what Nabahani says. But Ibn Taymiyyah, Nabahani didn't want to write on the subject because in his Sanad, he has Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah happens to be one of his teachers of his teachers. So he said, how can I say anything about him? And then he had a dream, and he tells about this dream, in which he saw Ibn Taymiyyah. And Ibn Taymiyyah, he says, was brown in color, asmar al-lawn, and he said he was thin, like an ascetic, and he said he smiled at me with a beautiful smile. And he took my hand and he said, behind him was a luminous man. And that's probably Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah. That's what he thought. And Ibn Qayyim is a good man. And then he said, in the corner was a dark man. And I can tell you who he thinks it was, but it was a man who was around Ibn Taymiyyah, who may have even interpolated his books. This man was a radical exoteric. And there are things attributed to Ibn Taymiyyah that I could never accept that Ibn Taymiyyah would say. And I won't repeat those. I could. But this man may have been the one who put that there. And this man was dark and solemn. And no one approached him. And so he said, and then he said, Subki, who was one of the adversaries of Ibn Taymiyyah in his life, he said he was on a throne in the heavens. And we could see his light, but we couldn't approach him. And so he said, when I had that dream, then I knew I have the permission now to write this book. And so he did. It's a very beautiful book, again, with great adab. He doesn't want to violate the respect he must show for anyone in the tradition. But again, Islam is an amazing thing. We have in our history these people like Mevlana Jalaluddin. I mean, is this humanly possible to do what he did? To produce poetry of this volume, of this excellence, of this depth, while doing all the other things that he does? And yet he, before that, was a great scholar in other things. Ibn Arabi, the great master, Shaykh al-Akbar, who you should revere his name. If you're not, I wasn't allowed to look in his books for 14 years. Even we had adhkar that were very, very influenced by him. I was not even allowed to look at those, even though they were in my pocket for 14. You can't even open that page. You can't open those pages. So Ibn Arabi, you must revere him. And in order to approach him, you have to have permission. You have to have a teacher. You have to have gone through certain stages. You're not allowed just to pick up his books and start reading, because you won't have an idea what he is saying. But he is a master. He is a master. And those who revere him will be lifted up. And this is one of the secrets of the Ottoman Turks, because Sultan Selim, Ibn Arabi's grave was discovered during his reign. Ibn Arabi had said that when Sin comes into Sheen, then they will find the grave of Muhyiddin. When Sultan Selim comes into Sham, which is Greater Syria, they will find the grave of Muhyiddin ibn Arabi. That's what they did. And then the muftis of the Ottoman Empire were asked to evaluate Ibn Arabi, because he was controversial. He does say things that most people can never understand. And so then they give very careful fatwas that this is one of the awliya of Allah. So beware, because their flesh is poison. You don't bite their flesh. You don't backbite them. You will be destroyed. Again, as we said before, Sufism is also the measure by which we measure this ummah. Look at the hell that is broken loose in the Muslim world today. In Iraq, in Syria, in Egypt, in Libya, in the Yemen, in West Africa, North Africa, and elsewhere. And again, we don't want to make light of a heavy problem, and we don't want to oversimplify. But most of the people who are the driving wedge of this attack are people who hate the Sufis, who destroy their tombs, who burn their books, and who justify putting any of them to death. You expect good to come from people like that? Never on your life. The seekers of evil and seekers of power, may God guide them, bring them back to the path. Ever you find that in our history, to the awliya, no good will come. And that will be true also for the history of the children of Israel. And the children of Israel, if we talk about them in authentic terms, we're also talking about the Christians, because Christianity begins as the religion of the children of Israel. They are absolutely essential to it. What is your attitude towards saints? What is your attitudes towards the saints? What do you say about Mary, who is a saint? Because this will determine everything. So we have to have respect and to be people who can bring this back. Tasawwuf always is the key to good, to creativity, to beauty, to compassion, to solve problems. And may Allah make of that and benefit wonderful company. And this beginning of the Rumi.
The history of? The tall honey-colored felt cap? Yeah, it represents a tombstone. And all of the dress has symbolic references to the world and life and death, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Layla, are your friends coming back? Okay, I guess we'll wait a couple of minutes and see. If you can, I guess we should start. Thank you. Okay. Dawood, is it Adiba coming back? Or? It was from here, yeah, but it's nice. It's because sometimes a podium helps, you know, when you can. Yeah, it is. I like it too. No. Okay. Please come. Okay, I think we should start. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I will talk a little bit about the Sema, the Mevlevi Sema, and about Rumi in general in a talk right after this, and show you some photographs that I will explain some of the things that are represented by the symbolic dress and movement of the Mevlevi during their turn. Okay. I feel now in a cage. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First, I would really like to thank Sheikh Umar for bringing such light and scholarship to this moment that we're in. And I'll try to slide around a bit in his footsteps. I think there's a little message up there. The lamp should be changed, but I think it's a Sufi message. That it's not necessarily for the machine itself. That the lamp within us has to be dusted off and perhaps at some point even changed, but at least dusted. Which is not your job. It's the job of the sheikh. When you find the sheikh and he finds your dusty lamp and he scrapes with the name of Allah a little bit of that dust off and light starts to come through and also enter. And it changes one. And then the job becomes yours to dust that light bulb and continue to allow that light to both enter and be seen through you. And that's not just electric light, that's the Nuri Muhammad that the Shaykh can even put into you or reveal that which is already in you. So I think it's a Sufi message that appeared, wasn't there yesterday, you know. All right. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Sema, then I'm going to go through the photographs and talk about them individually. The Sema of the Mevlevi is visible and invisible, audible and inaudible. The Mevlevi ritual of Semazan's whirling was inspired by the Sufi saint Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi, but brought to reality by his son Sultan Veled. As the Semazan turns toward his heart, right palm up to receive the energy from above, left palm down to disperse that energy to the world, he subvocally repeats Allah with every turn. This is an invisible part of the Sema. The music that is not for listening, but for participation, aids him in his kinetic meditation. The Sema was never meant to be an entertainment or the tourist attraction that it has become, but it is the zikr of the Mevlevi order of dervishes. There is great symbolism in the turn. It is a meditation in action, and only those who whirl can understand its true meaning. The Mevlevi rite can only take place after a short discourse on the Mesnevi, the praying of the prescribed prayer of the day. Sorry, these pages are stuck. Okay. The praying of the prescribed prayer of the day, and a session repeating Allah, a short zikr. These activities are not viewed, so they remain as hidden aspects within the Sema. They're usually done prior to the Sema beginning in the Semahana, the Hall of Celestial Sounds. So after which the turn can begin in the Semahana. But before that, there is an invisible aspect of the Sema that only the Semazans and the Sheikh participate in. In order to be a Mevlevi dervish, one must not only love Mevlana, but must live daily life as Mevlana did, in accordance with the guidance of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In other words, to be a Mevlevi, one must be a Muslim. To be a Sufi, one must be a Muslim. You can be a Muslim and not be a Sufi, but you cannot be a Sufi and not be a Muslim. It is possible, of course, to be a lover of Mevlana, and even to live within certain ideals of Sufism without being a Muslim. But to be a Sufi, one must be a Muslim. We say, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. This is Islam. And this is the aspect of Sufism which is its heart. The tall, honey-colored felt hat called a sikeh that you will see the dervishes wear represents the tombstone. The black cloak represents the world and is dropped at a certain point in the beginning of the Sema, signifying the departure of one's attachment to the world. And the long white tenura symbolizes one's shroud. There's a story of the first Emma. Maybe you know it or not, but it's a very lovely story. An old man was walking in the desert, and the angel of death approached him and said, Dead, it's your time. The old man said, Please, my Galabiya is very old, and if you take me here, it may be many months before somebody finds my body. My clothes will be torn, my Galabiya will be ripped by the sand and the wind, and my body exposed, and it will not be right for anyone to see me this way. Let me continue to the village, and in 3 days I'll come back. Take me. And Azrael agreed. And the old man went to the village, and in 3 days he kept his word, and he came back. And he was wearing a new galabia. And the angel of death took him. And many, many months did go by before they, the desert is vast, and you can turn around in it and turn around in it and never find where you are. But finally, after some months, his body was found. And they saw indeed his galabia was still shredded from the wind and the sun, but they found wrapped around his head another cloth. And they unwound that, and it was in perfect condition, and they wrapped his body in that, and that cloth became his shroud. And that was the first Emma. And most Muslims don't have any idea the symbolism of carrying one shroud as a symbol of their death on their head every day of their life. Many today don't even wear the Emma, let alone understand its deeper meaning. The message of all Sufi saints is divine love, not only Mevlana. We know Mevlana maybe better than many other Sufi masters because his life was very documented. People wrote about it. He wrote so much of it himself, and many people understood his being through his own writings, those of Shems Tabriz, the notes that have been found, Sultan Veled, Aflaki. He was historically documented, so we know a lot about him. There may have been other Mevlanas that we don't know about, as there certainly are, and I believe it, many unknown sheikhs that are guiding us and are present in our life even today, and we don't know where they are, and then they've been given the gift of not having to reveal themselves to us. Nevertheless, they are there, and they help as almost an invisible part of who we are. So the path of the heart. And Rumi emphasized that this love is metaphysical, not physical. Love cannot be explained. It can only be experienced. So these Westerners who interpret Rumi and his poems and talk about the poet of love, they miss the point. The point is that Rumi speaks of metaphysical love, a love that is on an unknown plane, one that you have to change yourself from who you are in order to even to know it. Even Rumi says, I began to write about love and my pen broke. So these photographs that we'll see in a moment are some frozen moments in the Sema. They indicate visually what can be seen and imply the unseen. If you listen with your inner ear, you may hear the sound of the Semizan's feet turning on the polished wooden floor. They were taken in the late 1970s in Konya, in Turkey, and share a glimpse of the zikr of the Mevlevi. Mevlevi Sheikh Suleiman Dede closed his eyes for a moment when I was photographing him, revealing a moment between waking and sleep, life and death, that we can share some 40 years later. A taste of honey. So I'm going to try to work this. Okay. This is an unusual picture in the sense that in the right-hand corner of the picture, there are two Mevlevi sheikhs, Selman Tuzan and Sheikh Suleiman Dede, Suleiman Loras. This is very unusual. It happened at the 700th anniversary of Mevlana. because usually two sheikhs don't sit on the same post. But they did at that night share that post, and therefore that becomes documentary-wise an important photograph for us to see that this did happen. And here you can see the tall honey-colored felt hat representing the tombstone and the white tenura. And what they're doing is passing before the sheikh. They bow to him, kiss his hand, and he kisses the top of their sikkah. And then they pass him and begin to unfurl and turn toward their heart, constantly repeating the name Allah. The musicians are in a distance. Sometimes they're on a raised platform, depending on the semahana that they're in, the hall of celestial sounds that they are performing in. They're doing their zikr. In this case, it was they were on a raised platform in the back. And that sound for the turners is part of their meditation. It's why some Westerners, when they've seen performances of the whirling dervishes, say, "Oh, that music is boring. It's monotonous." It's monotonous on purpose, because it's to be a meditation. It's not an entertainment of using music. So it's an important thing to understand that that sound, that audible sound of the music, is very much part of the rhythm of the Sema itself. I put two later pictures in because these were taken in the Jarahi Tekke, 100-year-old Tekke in Istanbul. And on Monday nights there is an authentic Sema that's done at the same time in a majlis room before, in front of it, where men are making a zikr Allah. So it's very unusual today to be actually able to witness an authentic Sema within the environment of a real tekke with ancient calligraphies on the wall and the feeling of so much zikr and so much prayer having been done in that room. So I included just two of those photographs so that you can see the intimacy of the turn within, I would say, a more authentic. I use the word authentic because even in Konya today, at the Sheb-e Arus, the wedding night of Rumi, when they represent the turn, they do it in a big sports center that they built. So it's a very different feeling. You can see the inner ecstasy of the turner, who gives himself completely to the name of Allah and to the movement as he turns. This was in another semahana, and you see the musicians were in a different place. They were on the side. So there's no absolute place for them to be, but they need to be in the proximity where the semazens can hear them clearly and their influence is present. Here the sheikh and the Semazen Bashi, the director, of the, if you like, of the Sema, who's in the tall white hat, are visible in the fourth salam. There are 4 different movements, salams they're called, within the Sema itself. Only in the 4th salam does the sheikh appear, and he turns not as the Semazens turn, but as Mevlana used to turn before him, with his hand on a lapel and his other hand holding the side of his hurka, his cloak. This was the picture of Sheikh Suleiman Dede I was talking about a moment ago. And I photographed him in his house that was right next to the Mevlana's tomb. And usually I don't take a lot of pictures when I'm doing a portrait of someone like this. And I may take 2 or 3 frames, and then I put my camera away. But as I took that one picture, he just closed his eyes. and something happened. I knew it when I was photographing it, but only realized it later when I printed the images. And I saw what that moment represented, at least to me, or could represent. That moment between life and death, the moment between sleep and wakingness, and the peacefulness of that being. This is a very old, posed, collective photograph done in a studio a century ago in Istanbul. And it shows, actually, historically, we see things like there were young boys that would turn. They started early, because to go into the Mevlevi, it was like a university. First, you had to be at least 14 years old. If you were 14, you had need the permission of your parents. If you were 18, you could go in on your own. And you literally gave up the world. You stayed there for 4 years. And you learned the Mesnevi. You learned the Quran. You learned the turn. You learned the music, whichever aspect of the Mevlevi you were inclined toward, whether it be the poetry or the music or the turn, you were directed in that area. And you also learned how to wash the kitchen floor. So it was a full experience. At the end of this time, you made a choice. You either stayed within the confines of the university, let's call it, or you went out into the world. You still could remain a Mevlevi, and you could marry if you went out into the world. If you stayed within the confines of the tekke, you didn't marry. Right? So some people would go into the world, they would marry, and on Thursday nights they would come and join in the Sema. And there are various musical instruments that are used, the Quran is read, the turners are there. So it sort of represents, as a composite in a sense, a posed composite, the Sema in a way. Here again, a sort of subdued, ecstatic moment in where you've let go of the world and are turning with the name of Allah in your heart completely. And subvocally, you're saying, Allah, 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 with every turn. So you're totally within your being. This photograph I sort of liked because it showed a certain kind of almost transparency in its movement, that you could see almost through the arm into the next person that was turning. And I had a feeling that this is really what happens, you know. Part of them sort of disappears. And this was just a silhouette of repose. And after each salam, they bow and they move back, they put their hands on their shoulders and wait for the next salam to begin. And then they begin again this path past the sheikh, and then unfurl again and begin to turn like a fledgling bird. So this happens 4 times, and in between they have this moment of repose. There's another angle of that. This photograph I like, I panned the photograph when they were turning, and when I printed it I saw that everything was in movement and out of focus except the hand of the turner, which was in clear focus. So again, the left hand down, the right palm up, and through the visible human, the energy of Allah comes through, and then whereas it can't stay within the person, it then must go back into the planet. We have to share it. You can't hoard this kind of energy. If Allah has allowed you to have this light and this energy, it's not yours to take into a cave. In Sufism, we have to distribute that as we distribute our zakat. Sometimes there's as many as 30 semazens at the same time. And they each, at one time I believe they represented certain planets. And I don't think that that understanding exists today. There is a line called the equator where the sheikh, between the sheikh and the musicians, or the end of the other part of the semahana, the sheikh sits on a red post, which was in honor of Shamsi Tabriz, the sun. Right? And so he's at the sun, and that line, invisible line, is the equator. And these semazens are turning as planets. And the energy of the planets exists within them. I believe that all of that is now sort of lost information. Okay, I think that's it for those photographs, so we can leave that on. Would anyone like to ask a question at this point? Or make a comment, or? If not, yes. I can't hear you. Could you talk a little louder? What?
The choice of instruments.
The choice of instruments. There are certain... the key instrument in the Mevlevi Sema is the ney, right, which is a reed flute and has great symbolism. That symbolism will be explained in one of the films I'll show you in the next couple of days. So there's the ney, the reed flute. There's a kudum, which are drums, and a bendir, which is like a tar in Middle East, and which keep a rhythm. And then there's a zither, like this flat, many-stringed instrument. And there have been, at different times, experiments, I think since the 50s, because this was dormant from the time Ataturk made a revolution in 1925 and forbade all dervish practices. So until between then and the 50s, when they somehow got it to begin again, right? In the 50s, certain instruments were experimented with. You know, there was a cello once, somebody even once did a violin, or they didn't last long, mostly. The basic instruments are a drum, which gives you a rhythm and a beat, and the ney, which is a plaintive, like Rumi starts the Mevlevi with, "Hearken to this reed forlorn." You know, this reed that has holes cut into it, you know, and the breath, only with the breath of who can make a sound. So those are the instruments, basically. Anyone else? No? Okay, I'll then continue, if I may. Bismillah. For more than 7 centuries, the circle of Rumi's listeners have grasped at the hem of his wisdom. He said, "I am neither from the east nor the west. No boundaries exist in my breast." Jalaluddin Rumi, a 13th century poet, was born in Afghanistan, spoke Persian, and lived his entire adult life in Turkey. Is the best-selling poet in America today. Why? Because he has become known as the poet of love, and his words are timeless. His message is love. His message is one of no boundaries. It's good that so many people are drawn to Rumi's words, but it should be noted that the roots of Rumi's thought was Islam. He was a Muslim who welcomed those of other religions and paths to his discourses, which were about Islam and based on the Quran. The love Rumi spoke of was not physical but metaphysical. The reading notebooks of Thomas Merton, a Trappist monk who lectured and wrote extensively on spirituality, were filled with excerpts of Rumi's writings. Hindu gurus often quote him, for his words have touched the heart of the true seeker. He was known as Mevlana, our master, and lived beyond the boundaries and borders that create the limitations of our lives. He existed without the petty differences that divide men, and therefore was free to live in the Nuri Muhammad, a place that is available to us all. There was a time when all the senses of all the senses of a Muslim could experience. There was a time that all the senses could be experienced by a Muslim in Islam throughout the entire day. The ear could hear the azan. The eye could see beautiful calligraphies written on the walls of mosques and other buildings, and see the architecture representing man and his creator. At home, the carpets were woven with reminders of Allah. Flowers and delicious foods could be tasted, and meditative experiences and prayer often brought the scent of the Prophet. Beauty was part of one's day, and beauty also reminded one of Allah. Rumi used the events of everyday life, the fragrance of fruit and flowers, the sound of thunder and snow, to reveal a way for man to wake from his somnambulistic journey through life. He revealed to others how he experienced the world through his senses. He wrote, "You've only been here for a few days, and you've become so friendly with life. I can't even talk about death anymore. You're on the journey home, and your donkey has fallen asleep in the middle of the road." We are stranded in the midst of life, astride a sleeping donkey, at work in the mill of nonsense, doing everything that is urgent and little that is important. There's a story of the Buddha. After he was enlightened, he was walking down a path, his being effulgent, glowing. He was munawar. A man was walking toward him and was so taken by this light, he asked, "Are you a celestial being or a god?" "No." "Well, then you must be a wizard or a magician." "No." "Are you a man?" And again the answer was no. "Then what are you?" "I am awake." Rumi said, "I'm a bird of the heavenly garden. I belong not to the earthly sphere. They have made for 2 or 3 days a cage of my body." In 1244, during the fringe of winter, Rumi, the university professor, met a king in a patched robe, Shems of Tabriz. Later, Rumi wrote, "Once I was in love with books. I towered above other scholars and men of letters. When I met Shamsuddin, the one who handed me the wine of divine love, I became drunk and broke my pens. My ablution was performed in a torrent of tears." Rumi's son Sultan Vela talks of Shems. Shems began to speak, and pearls came from his mouth. He sowed a new love in my heart and soul. He revealed secrets to me about the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad. He taught me to fly without wings. He unveiled my eyes so that I could see night as dawn. He took me to the boundless sea, where I found inner peace. I experienced a feeling of freedom, like a bird no longer caged, and a safety and protection from every manner of danger. After some years of jealousy of Rumi's students, Shems was caused to disappear. Rumi changed. Grief bit into him like the ice. On the streets of Konya, he heard the sound of the gold beater's hammer. The sound to Rumi was a repetition of Allah, Allah, Allah. And Rumi began to whirl in ecstasy, as if overtaken by a rhythm of joy. Here began what was later to be known as the Mevlevi Sema, introduced by Sultan Veled after the death of his father. Sometimes Rumi was anxious that time not be wasted, as he indicates in this poem. My poetry resembles Egyptian bread. When night passes over it, you cannot eat it anymore. Eat it at this point when it is fresh, before dust settles upon it. When bread is wrapped in the tablecloth, it is the inanimate thing that it is called. But in the human body, it becomes the spirit of life. It becomes transmuted in the body. As with bread, in all things in life, there is the zahir, that which is perceived by our external senses, and the batin, that which is hidden. The zikr can be pronounced by our tongues and heard by our ears. That is the zahir. The batin, the hidden meaning of the zikr, is within the heart of each of us. If you have musk in a container with a narrow neck, you put your finger into it, you can't get the musk out, but your finger is perfumed nevertheless, and your sense of smell is gratified. Being mindful of Allah is like this. Although you cannot reach His essence, remembrance of Him has many effects and many great, great benefits accrue. Zikr Allah is not only a bridge to Allah, but also a harmony of the breath. Correct rhythm of the breath gives health and completeness to life. Because of the half-sleep state in which we live, certain doors to perception and understanding remain closed to us. And we wander through the day, at best uttering muffled prayers. Allah gave to each of His creation a protection. Every animal has a way to protect himself from danger. The porcupine has quills. The skunk has a scent. The snake can inject poison. The gazelle is swift. The lion has fierceness and strength. The chameleon can change color. Birds have talons and wings. And to man, He gave the zikr Allah. To man, He gave the zikr Allah. What a blessing. What a gift. I was visiting a friend of mine in Santa Fe, we spoke of this the other day, who knew the chief of the Hopi Indian tribe. And we traveled a rough, winding dirt road to the top of the mountain and finally arrived at the Hopi village. The Hopis build with mud brick, but use wood for roof supports. We were served tea. I asked the chief about a building we saw on the way up to the village. I noticed a mud brick house dried and crumpled to the ground. The chief inhaled smoke from his pipe before answering. I glanced at his tanned, strong worker's hands. He spoke slowly. Sweet incense burned in the corner of the room. The people moved from this house. Soon after, the walls dried and the house fell to the ground like crumpled bread. The moisture from the breath of those who dwell in the house keeps the house alive. It's the breath of man that is important. A dried out heart will also crumple like dust. To the blind or the deaf, the world of sight and hearing is closed. But Rumi said, a man can be blind and deaf to his understanding. If this be the case, then the inner world, the world of the unseen, is closed to that man. One summer evening in a garden above Konya, Rumi began to speak of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to a small circle of listeners. The Prophet is not called unlettered because he was unable to write. He was called that because his letters, his knowledge and wisdom were innate, not acquired. Is a person who made inscriptions on the moon unable to write? What is there in the world that such a person does not know when all learn from him? What can partial intellect have that universal intellect has not? The partial intellect is not capable of inventing anything it has not seen before. Remember the story of the raven when Cain killed Abel and stood not knowing what to do with the body? One raven killed another, dug out the earth, buried the dead raven, and scratched the earth over the body. From this, Cain learned how to make a grave and bury a body. All trades are like this. The possessor of partial intellect needs instruction. Those who have united the partial with the universal intellect and become one are prophets and saints. Allah has said, "The human being is my secret, and I am his secret." That would seem to be enough for all of us, that Allah has actually said that the human being is my secret, and I am his secret. Wow. That secret, says Rumi, is a light from the divine light of Allah. It is the center of the heart, made from the finest matter. It is the sun of Tabriz. It is the self that knows all the secret truths. It is the secret connection between the created one and his creator. That secret does not love nor lean toward anything other than God. In the Mevlevi, Rumi says, the presence of a friend of God is a book. Even more, the book of the Sufi is not written with ink and letters. It is only a heart, white like snow. Here Rumi is saying that it's not just theoretical aspects of Islam that are important, but the experiential through the heart that's white like snow, not only from the letters of the book. The world is a book whose meaning changes with the understanding of the reader. Whoever is awake to the material world is asleep to the inner spiritual world. His wakefulness is worse than sleep. Rumi says, the one who wants to be awakened is the one who sleeps in the middle of the garden. But for the one who sleeps in prison, to be awakened is only a nuisance. Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi is the most we can hope for in this short time is to immerse you for a little while and hope you leave the ocean somewhat different. Rumi said that if you truly bow down in prayer, you cannot rise in your old self. If you place an empty glass in the ocean, what is in the glass is the ocean, yet it is not the ocean. In this double meaning lies the essence of Rumi, indeed the essence of Sufism. Rumi showed us how we can learn 10,000 things from one thing. It takes the shape of the vessel in which it is contained. Since water is shapeless, if it is in a bottle, jar, bowl, or a glass, it will take that shape. Once it leaves, it evaporates and returns to its source. It's the same with the soul of a person. It takes the shape of the body it is in. When the breath no longer exists in this body, the soul departs and returns to its source. The fihi ma fihi, in it is what is in it, are the discourses that touched upon deep subjects. These were given in private to small circles of listeners. Listen. Each person's spirit will return to his body in the same way that awareness returns to the body in the morning. At night, everyone goes to sleep. The shoemaker, the king, the judge, the tailor, and all the rest. Their thoughts fly away from them, and no thoughts remain for anyone. Morning breaks and gives life to the motes of their body. The thought of each one is like a scroll. Flying and running, it returns to each. There are never any mistakes. The tailor's thought returns to the tailor. The lawyer's thought to the lawyer. The ironmonger's thought to the ironmonger. The tyrant's thought to the tyrant. And the just man's thought to the just man. Does anyone go to bed a tailor and wake up a shoemaker? No. For that activity and occupation belong to him. And once again, he occupies himself with it. So you should know that in the next world, it's the same way. This is not impossible, for it happens in this world. Most of Rumi's verses were spoken in the last 25 years of his life. He read Quran, he prayed and fasted, and sometimes went to the hot springs in the Konya area. The whole of nature, flowers, fruits, animals, birds, vegetables, meat, minerals, the seasons, rain, snow, rain, sun, and ice, all appear in the mystical imagery of Mevlana's verses. He was able to compare the condition of nature with the condition of the human being. Life was the eternal sea of God, where one can drown or swim or walk on water. One could learn to walk above all earthly things. Having been reborn in Shems, Rumi is now reborn in love. He is beyond all division. Rumi wrote, I am not Shems of Tabriz. I am pure light. Beware if you see me. Don't tell anyone that you've seen me. The prophet Moses was told by Allah to place his hand on his chest. When he removed his hand, it was glowing with light, and the name of Allah was written on his palm. As the names of Allah are symbolically written on our palms. Allah has placed 5 bones at the wrist that extend into fingers. When a Muslim enters a room where there are others, he places his right hand on his heart and says to the occupants of the room, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon you. He places the 5 pillars of Islam on his heart, showing others that no harm can come to them from him. We have forgotten the beauty of greeting. And inshallah, we will remember. Even in English, we say goodbye. This originally was, God be with you. God be with you. Became goodbye. Goodbye, goodbye, bye, bye-bye. And we've lost all contact with it. So, inshallah, we will, even with the help of these kind of gatherings, find a way again of knowing how to greet one another and how to be with one another and how to be with ourselves. Ameen. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Thank you. Can you in the turn?
Movements are always the same, or they are like set, fixed, or there can be variations. And also, it's only the name of Allah that
Okay.
or
No one can ever make the same movement. We can make a similar movement, but it's like you can never step into the same river. Fil haraka al baraka. In movement there's blessing. So the movement of the Mevlevi, with each turn and each breath, is different. It appears to be the same, and to the one who's viewing it from the outside, it looks as if it's exactly the same. But the one who's making the turn and repeating, yes, they only repeat the name of Allah in this particular zikr. Right? To them, each repetition is different. You are not the same person when you say Allah now, and if you say Allah in 2 minutes from now. So that's why repetition within Islam is necessary, and repetition within Sufism is necessary. It doesn't lead, as it does in the ordinary world, to banality. It leads actually to a fresh look at things. Anyone else? Yes? Sarah? Can you talk a little louder? Every Sufi order basically is the same in some form of repetition and zikr toward Allah. The manner in which this is done varies according to who the initial sheikh that began that order was. In the terms of Rumi, Mevlana, it was through a movement. So they do this particular movement, and that's their zikr. The Naqshbandi, for example, have a silent zikr. The Helveti and Rufai have a very jahri zikr, very loud, powerful zikr that comes almost, it's called zikr al-darb, like a crashing zikr, where it's going to be like, hey, and this doesn't come from the voice box, because I could do that for hours and then talk to you as I'm talking. Who had gotten across will tell you how they got there. The boatman will say, well, buy a ticket, I'll take you on my boat. Another man will say, look, it's easy, just swim across. Someone else may say, just put your prayer carpet on there and you'll drift across. And someone else may say, you can just walk across on the water. How each person got there, that's how they will explain to you how to get there. We each then have to find our method that works with us, you know. And the essence of Rumi is everywhere. I mean, you say, okay, I'm in the UK, I don't have exposure, yet you're here. You know, you found your way here. Now, there are things you can read, there are things you can find people of like mind that perhaps you could make zikr with, you know, like that. But I believe that they're everywhere. And if you're a true seeker, that will be found. That you will find. But if you seek him, you may never find him. But if you do not seek him, he may not choose to reveal himself to you. But there are people like our dear Sheikh mentioned Haddad. I weep when I read his books. They're very thin volumes in English. I read 2 pages, I close it, and I have to think about it and work with it for like days, and then I can go back maybe come to the next page. They're so revealing, and they're all based on the Quran. Everything he wrote was based on the Quran. And when I weep, it's not because I'm weeping for what he said. I'm weeping because I think, I could never get to that place, even near that place. What a shame for me, But read him. I would suggest anyone who's interested in Sufism to read, Imam Abd-Allah al-Haddad. His work is on a level that's just not explainable. Now you can actually be nourished with another kind of food. So you can have a lunch. Okay. Well, we could take a break and then go to lunch, and unless anyone has anything more to say, that. And in the next few days, I will show a few films that will explain various zikr Allah from various points of view of different orders, and a film on Rumi, and so I think other things will emerge from those visual experiences. And thank you so much. Sorry? Yeah, I just print them up like 18-point, so I can read them. My eyes are a little weaker, and so there's not that much on a page. And I just number the pages, and I'll just print them up. And I use Helvetica because it has no serifs in it, so there's nothing interfering. I can see the letters.
Very beautiful.
From you, I really appreciate it.
Precious.
Thank you. I'm really honored to do that.
Astaghfirullah. To be here.
Amin, thank you.
Astaghfirullah. Thank you. It was very beautiful. Alhamdulillah. And the pictures, seeing them here, it's big size. More beautiful than in the books.
Yeah, there wasn't time to really show a film.
Yeah.
I needed to skip those off. So I think now, with this introduction of these photos.
Not supposed to be table down.
Yeah, why don't we move the table to the left a bit? Does it have to be in the center? Maybe it has to be in the center.
But I will put on
Kendini Breathe and Del Nefirem.
Speechless. Otherwise, she might be looking at the microphone.
too much again.
Bismillah. اسم خود بسم الله
Recite from the beginning of Masnavi.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم بشنوین نی چون شکایت می کند از جدایی ها حکایت می کند که از نیستان تا مرا بریده اند در نفیرم مرد و زن نادیده اند سینه خواهم شرح از فراق تا بگویم شرح درد اشتیاق هر کسی کو دور ماند اصل خیش باز جوید روزگار وصل خیش من به هر جمعیتی نالان شدم جفت بد حالان و خوش حالان شدم هر کسی از زن خود شد یار من از درون من نجست اسرار من سر من از ناله من دور نیست لیک چشم و گوش را آن نور نیست تن ز جان و جان ز تن مستور نیست لیک کس را دید جان دستور نیست آتش است این بانگ نای و نیست باد هر که این آتش ندارد نیست باد آتش عشق است کاندر نی فتاد جوشش عشق است کاندر می فتاد نی حریف هر که از یاری برید پرده های ما درید همچونه زهری و تهلیاقی که دید همچونه دمساز و مشتاقی که دید I'm not speaking Persian. Please excuse me. Salam alaikum. I'm waiting for a piece of paper to read from, but as promised. But if it doesn't come soon, I'll be reading from the computer screen. And so please forgive me. We are waiting for our chairwoman to introduce proceedings. That was to keep me going with. Ghassan.
Timings are also, you have this information in the files. Inshallah, today we will have, today we are less, not everybody already arrived. Inshallah, today in the evening we have another 13 people that they will come. And during the days we will have other visits and other people that they will come to learn and enjoy the program. Also, we will, in the sessions of music, because our guests from Turkey, they couldn't arrive yesterday, they will arrive today, inshallah. They will give us some, inshallah we'll have 3 days that we will have music. You saw it in the program Resonances of Istanbul. And it's a great opportunity because it's not going just to be music, it's going to be music with the teachings and explanations. And so we expect to have, we invited the people from the village. We have next to us, we have a village 5 kilometers from here, which always when we have events like that, we like to invite them because it's the best way to, it's the best way to show our Islam. So you will see tomorrow, for example, at 7 o'clock, a lot of people will be in that hall that there are from the village, that they will come for those classes. And I think that this is a good introduction. Any other things that are related to accommodation, registration, all of that, downstairs in the office, you have Malika or Maria. They are going to be there in the office. The two of them are my sisters-in-law. So you will see that most of the people, we are family here. And that's it, and welcome, and inshallah you enjoy the classes and the course. Okay, thank you very much.
First prayer time 2:30.
Oh, yes.
Prayer time.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Okay, so I give you the...
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wal salatu wal salam ala khair al-anbiya. Rabbi ishrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. I will introduce myself. I'm in charge of the Persian and Turkish collection at the British Library, and I did my PhD research and done some other writing since about Mevlana Jalaluddin, especially his divan. Alhamdulillah, it's a great privilege to be asked to speak to you about an illustrious figure as great as Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi, Quddasa Sirruhu, and in such a wonderful setting as the Al-Qariya de Rosales. It's a really privileged given the opportunity to tell about the spiritual master and poetic genius, Mevlana Jalaluddin Muhammad Balkhi Rumi. May Allah be pleased with him. Over the next few days, inshallah, we'll be making a spiritual journey in 8 stages. May Allah Ta'ala grant us benefit from it and sweetness and success in everything that pleases Him. I would like to thank the Thagra Foundation profoundly for this opportunity, and I pray Allah Most High grant its members success in all their work for His cause. What I'll be attempting to do, inshallah, is to give you a taste of the personality, the literary legacy, and especially the teachings of one of the foremost figures in the history of Islamic spirituality. In fact, of all world spirituality is acknowledged these days. No doubt some of you already know quite a lot about what I'll be telling you, and I must ask you to forgive me for the benefit of those who don't know. In these 8 talks, we consider covering various aspects of Mevlana and his legacy. A lot of what I have to say, inshallah, will be not in my words, but in those of our author himself. You may be wondering possibly why I'm referring to him as Mevlana, which in Arabic means our master. It's out of respect and veneration for a spiritual authority. This is the title by which he's almost invariably referred to by those who speak Persian. So you probably language. Actually, I don't believe that anyone thought of calling him just Rumi until the Orientalists started to do so, the same one or Keats. No honorary title required for them. If Allah wills today, we'll start with the life and times of Mevlana after introduction to each of his surviving works, not only those the mass for which he's most famous, also those which are in prose. The discourses just now get started. Translation of the same text in English, mine, because they haven't had time to do my own translation of all those passages. This is both to give us a break from hearing the same kind of English, 75 minutes in length, and for these organizers, asked me to speak for about 45 minutes and leave about 30 for any questions you may have. Be 60 minutes in length, speak for about 40 minutes, leaving the questions. I don't know how long I've got now. No. I know what the program says. It says we started 20 minutes late. This is respite. I'm sorry? 45 minutes to speak. You can read all about it. He was born in 604, 1207, either in now in Africa and the Sogdia, so Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. Mevlana's father, Bahauddin Valad, was a religious scholar and a mystic, and his Ma'arif, his written down meditations, are personal meditations rich in imagery, clearly from those proceeded to Asia Minor, where they settled and lived for some in various towns before finally settling, as you must know, in Konya. Jalaluddin and his wife Gohan Khatun, whom he'd married at the age of 18, had 2 sons. In 628-1231, so Mevlana's 12 by now, his father died, and Jalaluddin succeeded him, or being already by now a fully trained expert in traditional Islamic sciences. And the next year, Burhanuddin Muhakkak, formerly disciple of Mevlana's father Bahauddin, arrived in Cairo to supervise Jalaluddin's further training. Under the guidance of Khalwa, and enhanced his learning and experience through 2 periods of study in Arabic in Syria, where he may well have encountered some of the leading Sufis of the day. He also may have become familiar at that time with one of his loves, Arabic poetry. In Sufism, and now as well as in Hanafi jurisprudence and other religious sciences. And in time he gained influence among the most important figures, political figures of the day. Some of them he corresponded with, and we've got some letters. Others came to visit and learn from him. But part 2, takes us to the event that revolutionized Mevlana's life and has since indirectly influenced the lives of millions of people around the world. In 642-1244, a wandering dervish named Shamsuddin Tabrizi showed up in Konya. And in their first encounter, Shams showed Jalaluddin there were whole realms of knowledge and experience that were closed to him at the time. Both found that in one another's company and guidance, door to spiritual realization had become unlocked. And intoxicated with this love he had for this mysterious person, Shems, Jalaluddin no longer cared what others thought. Don't care about his reputation as a scholar. Intoxicated with what he found in Shems, he no longer cared. The radiance of Shems's presence, it seemed to him, barely separable from the radiance of God himself. Had not the prophet Jacob, Yaqub alayhi salam, suffered inexpressible sorrow at the loss of his son Joseph, Yusuf alayhi salam, there's the mazhar, is the manifestation of divine beauty, while being totally human. For well over a year, Jalaluddin and Shems were almost constantly closeted together. Because of certain things that certain people have written, it needs to be spelled out. This was a divinely willed platonic friendship. 2 complementary spiritual types of exceptionally high rank, each learning from the other. It's clear from the sources, especially from the maqalat or discourses of Shems, that the latter, Shems was the more Jalali or rigorous of the 2 spiritual types, and Jalaluddin, despite his name, the more Jamali or mild and serene. Meanwhile, many of those who'd come to revere Mevlana Rumi were at a loss to understand the transformation of their master into a man who was intoxicated with the love of divine, who composed poetry while whirling round and round. And one day Shems suddenly vanished, fleeing the jealousy of his companion's disciples. Jalaluddin was distraught, as we learn from the sources, including some of his own poems, dating from that period in which he pleads his absent friend to return. Mevlana's loyal son, Sultan Valad, was sent to find him, eventually brought Shems back from Damascus to Konya, having done so. And not long afterwards, Shems disappeared again, and this time forever. Who was this Shems Tabrizi? Contrary to general belief, a fair amount is known about him, besides the testimony of the biographers of Mevlana and his father. His collected sayings and maqalat in Persian have survived. He was a highly educated man, a Shafi'i who had studied numerous works on fiqh. It was part of his way of a Sufi to conceal his true self from others and to shun respectability, shun diplomatic behavior. He had met distinguished scholars. The man he speaks of several times, not necessarily favorably, as Sheikh Muhammad, may have been the Sheikh al-Akbar ibn al-Arabi of Mudfiya, radiallahu anhu. We learn from Maqalat the main purpose of Shems's travels was to find a true Wali Allah or saint, somebody who would learn, who would understand who he was, who Shems was, somebody who would really learn what he had to teach. There are these people, they go around looking for a people, they can't find somebody at their particular level, their particular maqam or hal, somebody who's going to benefit. According to this version in the Maqalat, Shems questioned him about the great Iranian Sufi Bayezid Bastami, and why he had not found it necessary to say to Allah, as the Blessed Prophet had said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "We have not known you as you deserve to be known." The Maqalat also reveal how greatly Shems admired Jalaluddin as a scholar and a spiritual figure who possessed qualities that he did not, was also a teacher to him, so the relationship was not the normal type, one master, one disciple. Although Mevlana suffered grief at the loss of his teacher, it must be remembered as a spiritual master, he knew all the time through realization, not just theory, that everything that deserves to be loved is ultimately attributable to the divine beloved, Allah Ta'ala, and to no other. But Shamsuddin demanded of him everything he had so that he transcend the bonds of conventional piety in the quest for complete illumination. So what he was mourning so eloquently now was the loss of that overwhelming inner sunlight of the companion, for him the perfect guide, for the scruffy impostor in the eyes of many, who had completed his spiritual direction and been his continual inspiration. But with time, the impact of this trauma waned, and whatever Shems had represented to him, Jalaluddin now found within himself and in his close companion, Salahuddin Zarqub first, a simple, pure-hearted goldsmith who had a workshop in the bazaar of Konya. He used to go tap and tap and tap, and Mevlana, you'd hear these invocations of the divine and the start to whirl as he heard this. And Husamuddin Chalabi, the star disciple, so to speak, and chief inspiration of the Masnavi. It's a poetical masterpiece. So with his equilibrium regained, Mevlana lived on for more than 20 years, supervising the training of his disciples and teaching through discourses and poetry and letters. His death in 1273 was mourned not only by all the Muslims but also by the Christians, a large Christian population still in Greece and Asia Minor generally at this time, late 13th century, and the Christians also had held him in great reverence. The future direction of the spiritual brotherhood now passed into the capable hands of Husamuddin Chalabi and then to Jalaluddin's son, Sultan Valad. The founder of what became known as the Mevlevi or Mevlevi Sufi order, Tariqat, Sultan Valad was also proved an able administration and a diplomatic man and an author in his own right, whose works include collected discourses, a divan, and 3 long didactic poems, which together make up one of the most valuable inside accounts of his father's life. So some words about the Fihi Ma Fihi. The best known, most important of the prose works associated with Mevlana is the collection of discourses known by the slightly enigmatic Arabic title Fihi Ma Fihi. What's in it is in it, or possibly what there is in it. The text as we have it was compiled from transcripts of the Master's spiritual conversations with disciples and with other admirers of his who attend the gatherings at which he was invited to speak. Prominent among these was Parvan Mu'inuddin, the local representative, as it were, the local chieftain representing the Mongol Il Khan. Il Khan being a descendant of Genghis Khan who ruled Iran, Iraq, and much of Asia Minor. It seems very likely the main compiler of the Fihi Ma Fihi was Sultan Valad. Most of the main themes that you find in the Masnavi are touched on in one place or another in the Fihi Ma Fihi. And as in the Masnavi, the author often moves between one point and another related one and shifts between narrative and commentary. For readers who are less comfortable with poetry, possibly because of the prosaic education so many people have received today, these days of rampant techno-domination, the discourses may offer a more accessible way into the teachings of the Master of Konya. Of the English translations, Arbori's discourses has better English, sometimes shows more understanding of Islam. The Thaxton's Sign of the Unseen has wider references and is also based on a later, much better Persian edition. But beware, please, of the rare version of Arbori that has been messed around with by somebody who's available on the internet. They've really trashed it up, in my opinion. You're going to be treated, inshallah, to readings and expositions of passages from discourses by my friend Shems. And so there's no need for me to expatiate further on this aspect of Mevlana's works, though I will be myself quoting some brief passages in some of these talks. Here's just a very short snippet in which Mevlana imparts an important Sufi teaching, because the Holy Quran specifies the daily prayers are to be instituted for the sake of remembering God, bivikri, for my remembrance. Hence, acts of worship that are devoid of presence of heart are of little or no value. Sufis believe a spiritual methodology is essential if our worship is to be sincere, because faith increases and decreases, and it has to be nourished. Question, quote, someone asked, What is more excellent than the salat, the ritual prayer? The Master replied, one answer would be the spirit of the ritual's prayer. The salat has to have a ruh, as already explained in detail elsewhere in the discourses. A second answer would be that faith, iman, is better than the ritual prayer. It's more a greater thing. For the prayer must be performed 5 times a day, whereas faith is something continual. The prayer may be omitted sometimes where there's a valid excuse, and in certain circumstances may be postponed to a later time. This is another superiority of iman. This can't be admitted for any excuse, and on no circumstances may it be postponed. End of quotation. The other prose text directly attributable to Mevlana is called the Majalis Sab'eh, the 7 sessions. And this comprises sermons of greatly varying length, which seems likely to be addressed to a more general audience, not just to people attached to the Sufi path. Again, these were probably edited by Sultan Balad. The text is a bit more problematic than Mevlevi Marfihi, because you've got some difficult passages. Judging by their content, almost all, if not all, were delivered before the encounter with Shems. In content and style, they're a little closer to some other authors' religious discourses than those which are contained in Mevlevi Marfihi. Each of the majalis begins with praise of Allah in Arabic, normally in sajj or rhyming prose, then continue with dua or supplicatory prayers, at least partly in Persian, and these are often very moving, very emotional. Some of the majalis begin with a hadith of the traditions of the Prophet ﷺ, which is then translated into Persian and commented on at length, before the speaker then moves on to one or more related topics, often with illustrative stories. So in the printed text, this can be discourses anything from 25 to 6 pages long. One of the interesting features of the majalis, which shows that Mevlana was already a connoisseur of mystical poetry, is there are a great many more verses, up to 20 couplets at a time, incorporated within them, if you compare them with Fihi Marfihi. Besides those verses which can be traced one part or another in Mevlana's Divan, there are also abundant quotations from Sana'i, his great predecessor in Persian mystical poetry, both from Sana'i's Divan, from his lengthy didactic epic, Mirsad al-Ibad. That's the wrong, sorry, this is the wrong title. Is Hadithatul Haqiqa, the enclosed garden of the reality. Other quotations could be traced to the works of Mevlana's other great predecessor, Fariduddin Attar, while the sources of a number of others haven't been traced. Having translated most of the majalis, I'm planning, inshallah, to publish a translation of the whole thing in collaboration with a couple of friends, inshallah. There's no complete translation existing at the moment. One part's been translated by Frank Lewis and other parts by William Chittick. That's all for now about the Majalis Sab'eh. I would have liked to read you some. We'll just have to see how time goes in a future talk, inshallah. The Maktubat, the letters. It was no doubt that Mevlana was an active correspondent as well as lecturer and preacher, whatever you say. Most of these 145 letters that have been preserved were written, probably dictated, to influential people, requesting favors on behalf of the writer's friends and giving nasiha, giving advice. Several of them are addressed to Muradin Parvane, who I was talking about just now, the local strongman, and his wife Gurji Khatun, who was actually a disciple. A few also contain short passages of spiritual guidance, and one of the interesting features of the Maktubat is the presence of invocations, interjections in Arabic or Persian. While some of these are of the kind you might expect to find in any pious literature, in others we find, for example, simply the name Allah repeated several times. So he says something, advice, and there's Allah, 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 Allah. This is kind of, well, it's underlining the point he's making. It's something, add an extra dimension to somebody's letter, right? Alhamdulillah. So that's the very quick look at the prose literature. Going on to the poetry, Mevlana Rumi's Divan. I'm going to say more about the Divan than about the Masnavi, because Masnavi will be quoting more parts from, and because it's better known. Maulana's lyric poetry has the intensity of a man who's given everything, lost everything, and then found everything. At times his praise of Shems reaches near blasphemous heights. It's as though the light of his spiritual being were nothing other than divine light itself. The poems are collected in the Divan, originally known as Divan Shems Haqaiq or Divan Kabir, the Great Divan. No less than 40,000 couplets, baits, very probably composed over a period of more than 30 years. Besides ghazals, the classic kind of lyric verse form, there are also ruba'is, quatrains, and the tarji'at. These are longer stanzaic poems. You have a stanza rhyming in one letter, or radif, and then you have a refrain, and then you go into another rhyme scheme, and each of these stanzas has to be the same length, obviously. These are some of the more successful poems. Sometimes you can see from the context, he thinks this poem is going really well. Okay, let's put in the refrain and continue the poem, keeping the mood going. Most of these poems are in praise of love of the divine and the ecstasy of the lover who's crazy enough to give everything in his quest for the beloved. Divanagi, divine madness, which is sanity, but appears madness to those on the outside who don't understand why anybody should get so worked up about God Almighty. Sayyid Hussein Nasr has aptly described these poems as crystallizations of ahval, spiritual states, closeness to Allah, longing, separation, hope, fear, self-reproach, exaltation, but also, in the case of a spiritual master, what he's describing for himself and his exhortation to himself are exhortations to his disciples to get serious. Some of them also contain narratives with morals, though in briefer form than in the Masnavi. So you can't just say that all the didactic poetry is in the Masnavi and none of it's in the Divan. It's not like that. It's not that simple. These poems were chanted at the assemblies of the Mevlevi dervishes, as to say the members of the Sufi order, which developed out of Maulana's circle. Later manuscript editions include a large number of poems, I have to tell you, which are actually the work of other authors. And a good many of these found their way into selected poems, the Divan-i Shems Tabriz, the well-known pioneering but not altogether distinguished work of the same R.A. Nicholson, whose excellent edition, painstaking translation commentary of the Masnavi, the work of product of decades of dedicated work, have earned him the epithet, not Nicholson, but Niku Lisan, of goodly tongue, from none other than Hussein Ilahi Qumshi, leading scholar of Persian thought and literature. As you probably know, Mevlana claimed not to care for poetry at all. He said, I only do this to please my audience here because my friends don't have the same liking for sermons, which was what everybody did. Everybody did that in Central Asia, where I came from. Said this was the accepted means of discourse and teaching. But these people are different. And the statements to this effect occur in Fihi, Ma Fihi, but also in the Risale Sepah Salar. This point I should add that one of the amazing things about Mevlana is that we know so much about him, not only from his own writings, but works by his son, as I just mentioned, and from a couple of works of fairly early date by murids of Mevlana himself or his immediate successors. So they go back to early times. You have to allow for some exaggerations here or there, perhaps, but mostly entirely credible about the things that they said, that Mevlana said. So the Risale Sepah Salah, the discourse of Faruddin Sepah Salah, is an early account of the lives and the manaqib, spiritual accomplishments of Mevlana and his circle, by a Sufi who claims to have been a disciple for 40 years of the master himself. An English translation of this important early source is likely to be published within the next year, inshallah, which I'm helping with. The British Orientalist Arthur Arbery and others, following the rhetoric of Sultan Balad's sometimes stylized account of his father's life story, assert, this is what they say about Mevlana and his poetry: he was wholly incapable of controlling the torrent of poetry that poured forth from him. But the quality of the poetry shows technical mastery, as well as eloquence and ingenuity. It's not just fervent, it's under control. Aesthetically, it stands in comparison with other masters of Persian lyrical verse. For example, one of these tarjiyat, these long stanzaic poems, is not just a short one, it's 84 whole lines, 7 stanzas of 12 couplets, everything equal, everything according to the rules of prosody, etc. And their coherence is exemplary. And at the end of it, he praises his own work in these words: take these 7 fatwas before the chief mufti, a tarjid, stanzaic poem, of such verse that burns up the light of Sirius, bright star. The Pishe Mufti Awwal Baridin Haf Fatvaro, the Tarjid Chonin Shetli, Kesuzed Nur Shetvaro. In terms of prosody, Mevlana employs a wider variety of rhythmic meters than any other Persian poet. It's extraordinary, and this alone is enough to prove that he'd actually studied the works of other poets assiduously and learned from them. Indeed, he was reprimanded by Shems Tabrizi himself for spending too much time perusing the verses of the great Arab poet al-Mutanabbi. Furthermore, the range, and more important, the range of imagery and symbolism employed testifies to extraordinary power of unitive vision. You see, it was part of the training. Every craftsman has to go on apprenticeship, right, and study. And it was deeply true of people who were crafting verses. So as, what's he called? Nazam Aruzi, famous authority on Persian literary theory from medieval Iran, says all the distinguished poets spent years memorizing thousands of lines of verse, studying them, seeing how is it done by the masters. And it does seem that Mevlana must have, however quick on the uptake, must have spent quite a lot of time actually studying this craft. It's not what you expect from somebody who's first and foremost a Hanafi scholar and then a Sufi master. But is this divan just a collection of love poems like any other? Not exactly, as I discern a number of motivations, I think, behind their composition, beyond the obvious one of expressing personal emotions, aspirations. Not that that's so surprising in such an exceptional personality. So one motivating factor is kind of the expressive therapeutic purpose, that even saints are human. It's evident that Mevlana lived part of his life under enormous psychological pressures. His son, Sultan Valid, relates in the poem Abd-Allah how Jalaluddin was transformed from a sober academic to an impassioned lover of God. The evidence is too overwhelming for this to be dismissed as mere poetic exaggeration, but we may draw false conclusions about how great the change was, because we've already seen Mevlana was already being instructed in under the influence of Sufism from his early childhood, because his father was obviously a great mystic. We don't know all the details. One German professor says, well, we don't know who his master was, so he can't have been a Sufi. This is a view of Fritz Meyer, extremely distinguished and learned, but also typically Western pedantic scholar. So we don't know who his master was, so he wasn't a Sufi, but to read his Ma'arif, you may think otherwise. Then after his father's influence, as we'd seen, Burhanuddin Muhakkik comes along to instruct him in Tasawwuf and send him for study in Sham. But Sultan Valad's characterization has colored the account of our poet's life by almost all the later writers. The passionate expressiveness of Mevlana's verse must also be seen in the context of conventions that govern all traditional Islamic poetry, and nowhere more than in the passionate world. Pledges of love and loyalty, expressions of yearning and sorrow, phrased in terms which to Western sensibilities give rise to suspicions of insincerity. Even in Egypt, Ya Elbi, Ya Elbi, you have these tremendous outpourings of emotion. And in medieval times, that very vehemence of emotive expression was required and expected precisely to show sincerity, to prove it. The second purpose for writing these, composing these poems in divan might be called apologetic, because Mevlana was concerned that those around him should understand what had happened to him. Not in the first stage, when he's just is completely under the influence of Shems and his passion for, but later on. His actions and teachings were consistent with the very heart of the teachings of Islam, that Shamsuddin Tabrizi was one of the awliya, friends of God, and that those who thought ill of him were failing themselves. And one of these passages that's germane to the subject is where the poet appeals to the critics of Shems, whose hearts have been poisoned by pride, challenge him to go to Shems, and he guarantees that Shems will receive them kindly. Ey jaan bedandishesh gustach dar pishesh man mujrimato basham galgilad dalbanet. O you soul who are thinking ill of him, just go and see him. It is I who will be at fault if the doorman arrests you. More dramatic still is the 18th of these stanza 8 poems, in the very last line of which Jalaluddin rounds on the person or persons held responsible for shedding Shams's blood, either literally in the sense of slandering him, in the sense of killing him, or figuratively in the sense of slandering him, because there is a story that he was murdered and thrown down a well, and this story is very popular in the Konya tourist board, but has less credence if you're looking at the facts. But there's a wonderful maqam to go and visit at Konya. In any case, if you're there, go to visit the maqam of Shems Tabrizi. He says, Ey to be fikret radi khun habib richte, nik negar to tovi, ey so toze khod gorichte. You who thinking shameful thoughts, appalling thoughts, shed my beloved's blood, mark this well, you are he, you who fled from yourself. The third purpose of the divan, poems are often didactic. If all poetry has a message, especially true of Sufi poetry. So all his works, as we've seen, are full of teaching material. While it's true the Masnavi is more obviously didactic than the divan, many of the ghazals, especially the longer ones contain moral and doctrinal teachings, and some contain stories interspersed with comments, which is a combination, as you know, that's characteristic of the Masnavi. Examples from the stanza 8 poems, where he actually tells a story and then explains about it, the night vigils of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where another place where Allah Ta'ala explains to the Prophet the reason why he created the world, and another where Pharaoh's secret jealousy of Moses is expounded. Other didactic passages without stories include one on the blessings of Ramadan, which I hope I have a chance to read to you, and in English and a little in Persian. And another about the purity and detachment of our blessed Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and in the same poem a passage on the gross and illusory nature of this world compared with the paradise. Elsewhere he says, don't waste your time, get ready for the journey to the next world, that's your true homeland. And elsewhere again, misfortunes which teach us to fix our hopes on the akhirat, the afterlife, to put in trust in providence, and to remind us that death is birth into a new life. In several tajiyats, we find these stanza 8 poems, we find intention of what we might call didactic inspiration. He's urging his followers to return to the spiritual struggle. Don't be half-hearted. This is something he says in Majalis Sabeh and somewhere else too. I think he says, you're like an eel. It's called malmahi in Persian. It means the snakefish. You're neither a snake nor a fish. So don't be this and that, be either a snake or a fish. The snake obviously is the nasty, noxious one, and the fish is the spiritual entity that swims in the ocean of divine oneness. May Allah make us all fishes, inshallah, amen, the best kind. Ready for our Creator to pluck us up and make us join Him, inshallah. He says, gain control of your soul. Your soul needs a good ruler just as the world needs good, just governance. Realize your true identity and rank. Forsake this world for the realm of the spirit. Another interesting thing about Divan, the poems frequently refer to the process of composition itself, so it's referential as he speaks. As in this example, it's time for the third stanza. Had God not wished it so, why should my soul, being concerned to compose poetry? And again from Tarji 10, another of these stanza 8 poems, where he's imagining the Shems is there with him. And far away, he's there in spirit. But I will not start on the 5th stanza without permission. Shams Tabrizi is ordering me, come on. He tells me, come on, go ahead. I'm a garden, you're a bee, so your blood may turn to honey, and your beeswax become shining. Beeswax, make a candle. We also find Divan lines that seem to relate to particular episodes in the author's life, as we've already seen. Time for a read a poem before we go on to the Masnavi, inshallah. Let me just find where I've put it. You got it here. Got it here. I'll read in Persian first, if you'll believe. This is the one of the poems that refers to a particular time in his life. There was disagreement between some of us as to which. دگر بار زنجیر بجستم از این بند و از این دام زبون گیل بجستم فلک پیر دو تایی پر سحر و دقایی به اقبال جوان تو از این پیر بجستم شب و روز دویدم ز شب و روز بریدم و از این چرخ بپرسید که چون تیر بجستم من از غصه چه ترسم چو با مرگ حریفم ز سرهنگ چه ترسم چو از میر بجستم به اندیشه فرو برد مرا عقل 40 سال به 62 شدم صید و تدبیر بجستم ز تقدیر همه خلق کر و کور شدستند ز کر و فر تقدیر و ز تقدیر بجستم بیرون پوست درون دانه بود میوه گرفتار از آن پوست و زن دانه چو انجیر بجستم ز تأخیر بود آفت و تعجیل ز شیطان ز تعجیل دلم رست و تأخیر بجستم ز خون بود غذا اول آخر شد خون شیر چو دندان خرد رست از این شیر بجستم پی نام بدویدم یک چند به تزویر خدا داد گرایی که ز تزویر بجستم خاموش باش خاموش به تفسیر مگو بیش ز تفسیر بگویم ز تفسیر بجستم Once more I have burst out of my chains, have escaped these bonds, this snare that grasps the weak. Fortune's sphere, old hunchback full of sorcery and deceit, through your youthful ascendancy I escaped that old man. Night and day we ran, breaking loose from night and day. Ask this sphere of heaven how I sped like an arrow. How should I fear sorrow when I'm death's bosom friend? How fear the general once I'm safe from the prince? For 40 years reason held me bowed down with cares. At 62 I was hunted down and escaped from devising. Fate has rendered all people, ordinary people, deaf and blind, yet I've escaped from fate's onslaught and from fate itself. Fruits are captive, being stone within, skin without. Like a fig I've burst out of that skin and that stone. Quote, delay brings misfortune, and haste comes from the devil. My heart was freed from haste. I escaped from all delay. At first blood was my food. At length blood turned to milk. When the teeth of wisdom grew, I forsook that milk. For some time we ran, pursuing bread, using imposture. Then God gave me such food, I escaped from all imposture. Be silent, speak no more of the details. I speak of exegesis. I've escaped the stench of garlic. That's tafsir and tafasir. Well, just very briefly about what the controversy is here. It's been argued, especially by a distinguished Turkish scholar, Abdul-Baki Gülpınarlı, who was himself a distinguished Mevlevi, that this shows 62 years. Mevlana must have been 62 when he met Shems Tabrizi. Doesn't work out with the traditional sort of timing at all, because he's born in 1207. According to the accounts we have, he meets Shems in 1244. That's 37 solar years, slightly more than that in lunar years. So where does 62 come in? Well, the Fakir here says, what, the first line of the poem? Degar bor, once again, once again. If it's the first time this revolution's happening, he wouldn't say once again. There's something else that's happened. And this links up with something I was going to say later on about the Masnavi, that in 1262, a date is mentioned in the second daftar of the Masnavi. He says, Muddati in Masnavi ta'khir shod, muhlati bayas ta khun shir shod, that there was a postponement of this Masnavi for a period, and some respite was needed in order for blood to turn to milk. He's talked about blood that turns to milk in this poem too. What's happened is to do with Hasamuddin Chalabi. He's lost his wife. He has spiritual experiences after that, and then he takes over some of the training of the disciples. This is my belief. And so Mevlana is released again. He's free, and he's able to resume work on his masterpiece, which will live on after him. And Allah knows best. Anyway, we'll go to the Masnavi now. I've jumped ahead a little bit. I've got 5 minutes more for this. We've got a section here on the legacy of Mevlana. I'll just say that in Turkey, Egypt, Syria, Palestine, other lands of the Middle East, the Mevlevi order, Cyprus, whose rules and organization were largely set down by Sultan Valad, continued to thrive for centuries, gradually acquiring a Turkish acculturation. The Mevlevis were especially influential in Ottoman Turkey, and many important statesmen, ulama, men of letters belonged to the order. Craftsmen, men in the street. In some mosques, Mesnevi Khans were employed to chant the Masnavi for the benefit of pious deceased Muslims who had left a waqf or charitable bequest for the purpose. And the extent of Mevlana's influence on Ottoman literature and other aspects of cultural life was so enormous it would be hard to overstate. And the Mevlevis became a famous tourist site for European travelers. The whirling dervishes, come and see the whirling dervishes. The tourists were allowed into some of the Mevlevi Hanes or dervish lodges to witness the Sema ritual. Sufi brotherhoods in the Republic of Turkey were outlawed by Ataturk, and though the tekke of Hazrat Mevlana himself in Konya soon reopened for business as the Mevlana Museum, several decades passed before the Sema was again performed in public. Today, however, packaged for maximum appeal, it's a daily attraction of tourists in Istanbul. In Persian-speaking, Persian-reading lands from Bengal to Bosnia, Masnavi was cherished and revered. In Iran, many ordinary working people did, and then do, study and cherish the work, learning parts by heart. Divan itself was mostly the province of the Sufis, dervishes who sang it in their Sema, until in modern times it finally entered the purview of Iranian literary scholarship. Full account of the manifold manifestations of Mevlana's cultural influence can be found in Frank Lewis's admirable study of our author. Above all, though, it's the wisdom of Mevlana's teaching that's most prized among Muslims everywhere. His predecessors, Sanoi and Attar, were giants, but no one rivals Mevlana Rumi in accessibility and universal appeal. Outside the Muslim world, It was in the second half of the 20th century that the name Rumi became widely known. To quote a prescient line from the Masnavi, "Everyone in their own view became my companion, but they have not sought out the secrets within me." I've got a couple of minutes on the Masnavi, so we'll tell you something, inshallah. I'll just add from what I was saying about Mawlana in the present day. Here we are now in the 21st century, celebrating this great figure and trying to disentangle the real Mawlana from the other ones, to seek out the secrets within him. In case I forget to say it again, thank you for your attention, and we'll finish just a little bit on the Masnavi, the undisputed masterpiece, a kind of treatise, encyclopedic treatise on Islamic spirituality, but without the alphabetical order of the encyclopedia, but more profound. Inspired by a suggestion from Hussam-ad-Din Chalabi that the master should produce a work comparable to the Ilahi Nameh, or Book of God, didactic poem by the great Sufi poet Attar, which some of Mawlana's disciples were much given to reading. And this is what he did, expressing the hope that after his passing, the Masnavi itself would be like a sheikh taking his place. And over 7 centuries later, we can see that that aspiration has been, in a sense, met. Well, of course, Mawlana realized that there's no substitute for a living teacher as well. I've explained about the composition Masnavi began around 660 or 1260 Miladi, continuing to the author's life 13 years later, but with a hiatus, as I've explained, between Daftar 1 and Daftar 2. Daftar, notebook, being the name of each of the six books. Those who know Arabic but not Persian may be interested to peruse the beautiful prefaces to the 6 books, 5 of which are written in Arabic. Each deals with 1 or 2 themes of spirituality. The 5th, for example, deals with the relationship between the sacred law, Sharia, the inner reality, Haqiqah, and the way, the Tariqah. Saying is that the Tariqah is what leads to the bridge between the Sharia and the Haqiqah. The Tariqah, the authentic Sufi path, binds observance of the outward rules with realization of the inward reality. Masnavi was famously praised by the Sufi poet and metaphysician Abdurrahman Jami as being the Quran in Persian. This, of course, is poetic hyperbole, but the Masnavi certainly offers, amongst other things, profound commentaries on many passages of the Holy Quran. It also points to a vital consideration when reading the narratives in the sacred scripture, as well as in the Masnavi, a point made by Mawlana himself in the course of the poem. He says, when you're reading or hearing about, for example, Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam and Fir'aun, Moses and Pharaoh, beware of thinking this is just a tale of the ancients, Asatir al-Awwalin. In reality, at a deeper, more significant level, it is an account of the conflict between truth and falsehood takes place within one's own soul. So he warns, don't think when you're reading about Moses and Pharaohs is just a story from a long time ago. It's your story. The notion advanced by Orientalists in the Masnavi as rambling and lacking coherence is a serious error. While the connecting thread may at times be subtle, time and again 2 or more themes are skillfully interwoven, left for a page or so, then resumed. So much again for this just wild inspiration theory. Same claim about randomness has been made about the ghazals of the great lyric poet Hafiz. The prevalence of such views shows how much difficulty many Westerners have with the aesthetics of literary works from other cultures. I'm just going to say that we're just about done here. Where did the stories of the Masnavi come from? Many sources, a rich seam of folk tales to be mined in the written oral traditions of Central Asia and the Middle East. Certain stories, for example, derived from Khalil of Adimna, famous animal fables associated with the Arab world, but of Indian origin. Others, such as the now world-famous story of the elephant in the dark room, what is it, can be found in the didactic poems of Mawlana's predecessor Sana'i. A great many of the narratives, however, are derived from the Holy Quran and from the stories of the prophets, the Anbiya, the Awliya, the saints, their triumphs, and their relationships with their Lord and with their fellow creatures. While most of the tales in the Masnavi are not original, the poets and passages in which the moral is dwelt on Another possible reason for the comparison with Islam's holy book. Mevlevi is being compared to a kaleidoscope in which the author puts on view the multiple patterns of existence. Human existence. Mevlana himself described the poem as the bazaar of Tawheed. So, time to go shopping. Thank you very much. Thank you. I guess we've got questions. Well, we've used up the time, but very artful on my part, but I can answer them now if we have a few minutes indulgence. There are questions, otherwise in the interval, since there are not so many of us. Yeah. Oh no, not one of those. Okay, just give me one at a time, please, because I'm slow and forgetful. Okay. تفضلوا.
One of them is the fact that Mevlana's father was a disciple of his creation of some traditionally this has been maintained by some others.
We can do one at a time, just because I'm a bit slow, and doddery. Okay, I myself am guilty of having written this about Bahauddin Valad ulama as being Kobravi. We just don't know, and there isn't much to go on. Interestingly enough, Badiou Firuzan Far, a great Iranian scholar who Maulana's Divan and had a Sufi master, but you find with some of the Kobravi teachers, beautifully Najmuddin Daya Razi, author of Mirsad Ibad, one of the greatest Persian poets. We know that he was, he says nothing, almost nothing about his out of hand as having no concrete evidence, and in that part Frank isn't wrong, but I think there's more to be looked at about this, as there is about other aspects of the Kobravi and their influence as well. Second question, please. Yeah, buyurun. Yeah, you're right. This is entirely possible there are other ones. Now, I'm at fault for not mentioning what the other ones, the understanding, and that's certainly what Frank Lewis about it. He was none, but not as big time as somebody like Faruq Razi, who was clearly of a quite different kind of temperamental character. Going to be one kind of alim or another kind of alim, especially so considerations in there, and so there may be more than reasons than one why they moved westwards, though I don't know how many people knew at that stage that Providence was going to offer so many opportunities in Rome, in Asia Minor, for people to settle themselves and for Islam to become the way that by divine ultimately did. At that time, it was still, the process of Islamization was by no means finished, as you know. Third question? Sorry, I am not forgetting. Jalaluddin Jalaluddin had something to do with it, yes. As far as we know, he simply disappeared. They found something down there, plastered over down the well, but I don't believe that they found I'm not sure that they found a body, and there is other circumstantial things that I can't remember. I can't remember properly at this moment what there is against the idea, but it's something to have happened under people's noses in Konya seems unlikely, and for Shems to have been around for long enough, don't know. But it makes a great story, and Mehmed Önder, director of tourism in Konya, sort of very much played this up against opposition from some other people, especially Mevlana's family, of course, didn't want to large in. There's no doubt there was some friction between Alauddin and Shamsuddin. Yeah, no question about that. Anyway, Allahu Alam. Yeah, please. I was using mysticism, mystical many to change from saying the Sufi and Tasawwuf all the time. Some people say, for example, about a poet like Sana'i, he's definitely one of the ones we don't know about as Sufi affiliation for. We know that he has his teachings were towards the esoteric side. We don't. He was actually a member of a Sufi order. And despite what I said about Fritz Meyer and Bahauddin Valad, it's not necessarily the case that everybody has a spiritual master who is esoterically inclined. There are other possibilities, or from these political or inverted commas political reasons, they don't outwardly subscribe to following any particular Sufi master. And that was the case with Sana'i. So sometimes it's thought he's just a didactic person whose train of thought goes in mystical directions. But if you like, I'm being perhaps sloppy here and just say, well, I'm just using it for variety. So you can't draw a straight line. But the origin of the word mysticism is from the Greek word muin, to be silent. The mysteries, the things that you have to be silent about, you can't divulge them. They're things that go beyond speech to be comprehended, and or things that it's not permitted to speak about to non-initiates. So in that case, mystical verse, in a sense, is a contradiction in terms. If you're not allowed to speak of it and you can't express it, you don't. But as you know, literature, Sufi literature, other perhaps mystical literature, ishara. It's an illusion. It's not telling you this is exactly what it is. There's a difficulty for some very decent, pious Muslims, especially the ones who are more used to reading software manuals, have difficulty with this literature because how can they write about wine? Wine's haram. No good to speak about wine when it's haram. Allusion, isharat. Yes, allusion, isharat. Yes. So the people point to things, they don't necessarily do, this is it. So. Ishara. Well, I think it's a good place to stop. It had to be the things to be silent about. So Mevlana says, "Khamush, be silent." So where we stop. But the Khamushi will be broken this afternoon, later on, inshallah, this evening, on the subject of Allah Most High, His creation. Thank you. Okay, go to break. Thank you very much, Dr. Umar. I value your opinions and things on anything you have to say may be taken down and used as evidence against me. I said I value your input on anything that may be taken down and used as evidence against me later on. found something. Found something you didn't know?
Yes.
Oh, good. Found something.
program has been provided by the Friends of Poetry and by the Witter Binner Foundation for Poetry.
In the town of Konya, in central Turkey, in the middle of the 13th century, a prominent religious scholar named Jalaluddin Rumi was suddenly separated from his teacher and spiritual friend. In his grief, he took hold of a column and began turning. Verses of poetry began pouring out of him. Remarkable poetry. His students wrote the words down. 700 years later, Rumi's poetry is being